Hello and welcome to the October 2023 podcast from Le Monde Diplomatique. My name's George Miller, and my guest this month is journalist and Southeast Asia specialist Christine Chaumeau. Christine has a piece in this month's edition of the paper entitled Phnom Penh, Rising Skyline, Disappearing Lakes, in which she looks at the Cambodian capital's huge expansion in the last couple of decades as a way of framing the wider changes in the country since its civil war ended in the 1990s. Before we get to the interview, just a quick reminder that all previous episodes of this podcast are on the website at mondediplo.com, and you can subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss a future episode. This summer, the man who has dominated Cambodian political life for the past 4 decades, Prime Minister Hun Sen, stepped down, though his influence is unlikely to be over, as he's been replaced by his son. Under Hun Sen, Cambodia experienced rapid economic growth, reflected in the rising skyline of the capital and its grand monuments to him. But his exercise of power has been ruthless, with opponents of the ruling Cambodian People's Party suppressed and silenced. So I wanted to know what Cambodians can expect as his son takes the reins. Before speaking to Christine earlier this week, I'd noticed she published a book in Cambodia some 20 years ago. So I began by asking her how her interest in the country came about.
It was really by accident. I was a student in journalism, and I wanted to go abroad because that was my aim as a journalist to be an overseas and international journalist. And first I was thinking of basing myself in India because I had a report on of the 10 years anniversary of the gas leak in Bhopal. That was in 1994. I was there. And then by accident, my teacher said, "Oh, why don't you go to Cambodia to do your traineeship? I know someone with a small paper there." And so I ended up spending a few months in Cambodia. I was supposed to stay there just 6 months. And then it was in 95. I was there for the first time, and it was really a fascinating time being a young journalist, really untrained. Just out of school, because the country was really getting out of the civil war. We were just after the biggest UN-funded operation at the time. It was the UN had an operation for a free and fair election in 93. So it was really the atmosphere of a country getting out of civil war and trying, under the patronage of the Western world, to set up and to re-engineer politics and to make it a Western-like democracy after years of civil war, after the Cold War as well, because Cambodia was aligned with the Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russian. So it was pretty much a turning point, and it was really fascinating for me. And I started freelancing for a newspaper there, and voilà, that's how it came. And since then, I kept really being interested in how the country has evolved, and so I go back there every year or so and look at what changes. It was also the end of the Khmer Rouge era.
Yeah, so you really have followed that story about its political change, about its attempts to modernize, about investment coming in from overseas. You've followed all those twists and turns of the story of modern Cambodia over the last nearly 30 years.
Yeah. Exactly. No, what's interesting in the story of Cambodia is that you can also see through the story of this country. It's like the passing of time in terms of the geopolitics. In the early 90s, we all had this image of, after the fall of the wall in Berlin, and that capitalism world and the Western ideas of the democracy as one,
Yes.
and was on the winning side. And so there was this image of the Western countries going and reframing or re-engineering countries and Cambodia was one of the first. and experiencing that. And we have seen those big UN machinery. And sure, I mean, it brings peace. I mean, Cambodia ended up being at peace in 98 when the last Khmer Rouge, I mean, were defeated and re-entered the national society. But since then, we have seen the way the big players have changed. I mean, the dynamics between the big players like the US, China, has changed also the dynamics within the country, because now when the Western world was really, really a key player up until the 2000s, asking lots of questions about democracy, human rights, and rightly doing that. But because of Hun Sen was a leading figure, I mean, he has been in charge of the country since 1985, and he knows how to play out the different actors. And being a very pragmatic leader, he has been able to make his way through all the demands. And because also the Western countries, even though they put as a priority human rights and democracy, it's sometimes just words, and they do not go further and to apply really sanction or to make strong statement or strongly enough. So, and Hun Sen also was able to play out with China and sided himself with China, and he is the main Chinese friend in the region in Southeast Asia now. So yeah. And lots of Chinese investment. It's the biggest investors in Cambodia. Obviously, COVID has changed a little bit things, and the crisis, economic crisis in China also. Chinese investor less inclined to come to Cambodia, but still, it's a major ally for Cambodia.
Yeah. And Christine, how did Hun Sen survive for so long? Because, as you say, he came to power first in 1985. Cambodia, in the aftermath of the civil war, had many problems to contend with, and he has remained in power until earlier this year. He handed over to his son, and we can perhaps talk about that later. But what was the means by which Hun Sen remained in power for nearly 4 decades?
He's a very intelligent guy and pragmatic, but he's really ruthless. Through all this period of time, I mean, 85, I mean, he was a very young leader then. He was 35 years old, or he was younger than that, 29 or something. Yeah, as you say, they are survivors. I mean, those guys are survivors. And Hun Sen was first a commander of the Khmer Rouge. I mean, to start with, during the civil war in the 70s, he joined the Khmer Rouge. He was part of the Khmer Rouge. He fled the Khmer Rouge when the Khmer Rouge apparatus were purged. So he went to Vietnam and came back from Vietnam to topple the Khmer Rouge with the Vietnamese army. So he has been trained as a soldier. And in the 80s, you have to remember that when the Khmer Rouge were toppled in 1979, the Western world discovered the genocide that was done by the Khmer Rouge. I mean, nearly 2 million people were killed, and it was devastation. I mean, but because of the civil war, the Western world aligned with the Khmer Rouge. They were supporting the Khmer Rouge, and the Khmer Rouge were able to keep a seat at the UN until 1991, which is quite how can you figure that out? I mean, leaders who were responsible of the killing of their own countrymen, were supported by the US and by most of the Western countries. And they were leading a guerrilla based on the border with Thailand and Cambodia. So there was on one side, you had the Western world. On the other side, you have Cambodia with the Vietnamese and Russian supporting them. So it was a proxy war, and Western world was supporting the bad guys, not giving any support to the survivors of the Khmer Rouge within Cambodia. So I think Hun Sen, that's his background. we have to keep that in mind to realize why also when the peace accord in 91 led by the UN and the Western countries, and through all the 19s, when the Western countries were trying to told him, okay, you have to be democratic, human rights orientated. But considering his background and considering the history has been through, I mean, it was also a game for him to say, well, you have been supporting the Khmer Rouge for how long? And now you are coming to give me lessons of what democracy and human rights is. That being said, Hun Sen is a ruthless leader. And since 98, when the second election after the peace agreement, since then he has been reelected every time in a framework where there is very limited space for the opposition. In 2017, he said, okay, we cut all newspapers, we ban all opposition. And it was the end of this idea of a possibility for Cambodia to be a democratic country. And it came back to a one political party state. All through that period, since 1998, we have seen leaders of trade unions, journalists, charismatic figures who were questioning the rule of Hun Sen being killed, and without any investigation being made. And now in Cambodia, you had roughly 100 political prisoners. So yeah, that's the kind of rule that he has been imposing on Cambodia and extending his ruthless way of running, and also using fear towards Cambodia on Cambodian people, threatening them. I mean, in the last election, he threatened those who would not go to vote of being outcast of the society. And so, yeah, it's pretty grim.
And when you go to the country, Christine, given what you've said about the difficulty of journalists and other political opponents speaking freely, how difficult is it for you to talk to ordinary Cambodians and hear their stories and hear what they're thinking and hear what their worries are and what the conditions of life are like? Are people afraid of speaking to a Western journalist?
Not quite yet, I would say, but I've seen that changes as well. 5 years ago or 10 years ago, people were more direct in saying things, and now you see people and you hear people who prevent of talking or make understatement or tells you in a very curved way, if I may say, that they do not really buy what the government is trying to make them believe. You can feel that now there is no more free press and there is no more freedom of expression. Even the website or the social network are under control, and you can be put in jail or you can be threatened by the police or questioned by the police if you put anything on the website that is questioning the way the government or Hun Sen is leading the country. I mean, you still have people talking to you, but you have to explain how you will protect them, and also they make sure that you don't mention their names directly, or you can feel that people are more concerned about talking to Western journalists and to journalists in general.
And at the same time, you write about the city and how the city has changed and the building and some of the very fancy building projects. There are clearly some Cambodians who are doing well within the system. Who are those Cambodians? Is it a very small group of middle-class Cambodians with connections to the government in the capital? Are those the only people who are really benefiting from the way that Hun Sen has been running the country?
Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, it's a big middle-class group, but still, I mean, it's a middle-class. I mean, there have been lots of money going into Cambodia for the last 30 years. I mean, the country has been like 7 point growth in the last 15 years or so, continuously. So it's a place that has been interesting for investors and for, there has been a development of an industry, especially garment industry. So yeah, you have a middle class, a growing middle class, but you have a huge gap between the richest and the poorest. You would say that the elite is really running a lot, gaining a lot of money, and those are linked to Hun Sen family, an economic clan that has been growing since the last 20 years. And yes, you have people living with $1,000 or 600, which is, you can live nicely with this amount of money now in Cambodia, especially if you own your own house. And those are benefiting in a way of this improvement and of the city development. They are really happy to be part of the consumer society that we see everywhere with the globalization of brands and everything. So you have malls and restaurants, and those are benefiting. And the issue is that trickling down and public services and do not exist, basically. And health and education and everything is privatized. So that's only serves the wealthy people or middle class. And for those who are under middle class, they are really struggling. And you can see, like, since COVID, especially, the economic situation has been really hard. And now you can see pockets of hunger in some part of Cambodia. You can see lots of problem in places in provinces where you used to have a really lively, maybe it's too strong a word, but people were growing rice, and now it's really hard for them. And so villagers, people had to go abroad to employ themselves. And in villages, you see the little one, the kids, being looked after by their grandparents, because a big chunk of the workforce are going to look for illegal work in Thailand. So yeah, you have discrepancy quite big between the city, like Phnom Penh, where everyone wants to go. Because it's easy to find some odd jobs, and the rest of the country, basically.
And in the period that you've been visiting Cambodia, Phnom Penh has grown hugely, hasn't it, as a city? And I wondered if you could, because you focus on the changes in Phnom Penh in your article, could you describe the city that you first encountered in 1995, and could you describe it today? What's has it changed beyond recognition?
Yeah, 95 was really a small city, very green, lots of lakes, and very peaceful, and virtually no cars. Everyone was going on moped, motorbikes, or cyclos. And it was not spread out. It was really concentrated within the dike. Because the city had been built all through the start of the 19th century and around dikes to protect it from the floods of the Mekong and of the Tonle Sap River. And the system of the lake were a way to protect it from also heavy rain during the monsoon. And you could row on some of the lakes, and it was fresh air and very different from Bangkok or Singapore in the 90s. Because already Bangkok and Singapore, even though they are very different now as well, but they were already very modernized and lots of skyscrapers. In 95, you had no skyscrapers. It was the tallest building was maybe 10-story high, and now it's turning. It's not quite yet Bangkok or Singapore at all, but obviously, lots of green spaces had disappeared, and the wooden houses had disappeared, and now you have more skyscrapers and condominiums, and most strikingly is like everywhere you see building work going on. I mean, if you go a bit outside of the city center itself, of the historical part of the city, you see trucks and trucks and trucks load of sands to fill in the lakes that remain. I mean, and lots of works going on, lots of worker everywhere, and lots of noise of the workers the construction sites. Sorry. So it's changing rapidly. I mean, there was a gap in between. I did not go there, and I did not recognize the place because it had changed so fast. But you see all the amenities you see in Asian in Asian big cities like like the malls and the condos and the swimming pool on upstairs and stuff like that. And people are enjoying that, and it's. I understand completely, like when you get out of a civil war and when the economic situation was really hard for a long time, and it's great to be able to enjoy a coffee somewhere. I mean, I'm talking about middle class, obviously, but people are quite happy to see their city changes and evolving in what they see as being the good way or the example of development. It's what people see as a good development. I mean, that can be questioned, but that's what they see as being good development.
Yeah. So that's understandable. And some people are having a better life. And, that's entirely understandable that some people want to take advantage of that. But you mentioned the filling in of lakes, and you mentioned there used to be a system of dikes to protect the city from flooding. And I wondered, what kind of environmental protection does the city have now? Is it truly much more vulnerable because of this uncontrolled, unplanned? It seems like there isn't really a plan for the whole city. Perhaps a developer gets the permission to build a particular development, but nobody's really thinking about the city as an organism. And so there are vulnerabilities there. And I wondered if you could say something about the environmental cost potentially to the city with all this building that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say how the city will be livable in the future because the filling of the lake has increased the flooding, even though the government is saying the contrary. I mean, that it's not linked to the filling of the lake, that the flooding. I mean, flooding has been always there to a certain extent, but the as you say, the master planning of urban planning is really not control, and it's more private investment that are growing the city and with very limited control from the municipality or from the government. So a developer can do pretty much what they want. And when they do what they want, sometimes they block the sewage system or they block the drainage system. So you have to get around that. And as the city has grown so fast in so limited time that the drainage system has not been developed at the same pace. So you have this issue of flooding, but you have also issue of heating. I mean, people are saying that during a heat period, when the temperature are very high, it's very hard to stay inside their apartment because even sometimes air conditioning is not working, so they have to be out, and they have no much green space, green parks, so they don't know where to go to be in fresh air. Also, you have the issue of sand being dredged from the Mekong to fill in and to provide for the construction. So we don't know what's going to happen with the Mekong. I mean, the Mekong itself has many issues, but around Phnom Penh, lots of sand being dredged. So we don't know how the electricity in the future will be provided to the city. I mean, in some part of the city, there is not enough electricity to provide during for air conditioning. So lots of issue will come about in the midterm or short term. But as a friend of mine was saying, I mean, the middle class don't care yet about those issues that we are part of people in our part of the world are talking about environmental issues. It's not yet there, except for a certain part of the elite or educated people. But most of the people, they are thinking of how they will feed themselves or how they will provide for their kids to go to have a good education and for the daily life, rather than talking about future issues and environmental issues. And people are happy to have cars. Cars, it's like the way to go to in Phnom Penh. So now you have blocked streets and the air pollution is starting as well. So it's going to be like any big city in the West, basically.
Christine, I wanted to finish today with the man who took over from his father, Hun Manet, who has taken over from Hun Sen. So after nearly 40 years in power, he nominated his son to take over from him. And the new government has lots of sons of people who've served in previous CPP governments. So how do you think Cambodians are looking at their future? Do they have any sense that this is a time of renewal, or is it really simply continuity and more of the same? What are you looking at in terms of what this transition might mean for Cambodia?
Yeah, in a sense, there is continuity. But what's interesting is that the CPP, the political party of Hun Sen, and the instrument of his power, has been able to re-engineer itself. And that I'm taking the word from Astrid Noren Nielsen, a researcher on Southeast Asia and a very well-known person who follow Cambodia. And she has been looking at the way of how CPP has been able to put in place this new generation, well-educated, young, bright people, educated abroad, who will bring with them a different style of power. I don't see them as letting freedom of expression or letting newspaper open again or releasing political prisoners but they will be able to phrase differently and to engage differently with a young generation. We have to keep in mind that 75% of Cambodians are below 25 years old. So it's a very young country, massively interesting and lively. And so this new generation of politicians, and they deal with the young generation of Cambodia through social networks and they engage with them in a very different way, and they persuade in them. They play with this envy of consumerism, and they rely on this idea of stability is good for the country and peace is good for the country. And also there is this idea of nationalism, pride. That's something that they use very much to make people, to make Cambodians proud of themselves, which is good. But when you use nationalism as a tool, it can be tricky as well. It's one needs to be cautious of how far that goes in terms of how you position yourself towards foreigners, or nationalism can be a very tricky tool. But I think in all, it will be lots of continuity. And Hun Sen himself has said that he can come back to power anytime. He's still in the background, and he's not letting his son do whatever he wants.
I was speaking to Christine Chaumeau, whose article in this month's paper is entitled Phnom Penh, Rising Skyline, Disappearing Lakes. You can read Christine's article at mondediplo.com. If you're a subscriber, you can also read every edition of the paper going back over 25 years and online exclusive content. And if you're not yet a subscriber, there's plenty of open access content online to entice you to become one, including the full archive of this podcast. You'll find all previous episodes on Le Monde Diplomatique's website, and you can subscribe on your favourite podcast app to make sure you don't miss future ones. In the words of John Berger, why read LMD? To make sense of what's happening in the world behind the misinformation. I'll be back again next month with another interview with one of our contributors. So until then, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.